in 1932, during my junior year at Gallaudet College, myself and two other friends of mine got jobs as dishwashers for the summer at Hotel Wilson in Placid, New Jersey. It was getting close to the fall and just before the end of the summer, and one boy, a friend of mine named Poplo, wanted to buy some shoes. And he asked me if I could drive him over to Asbury Park, New Jersey, where they had a good store. I told him I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. And then he asked another friend, George Owens, to drive him over there. And I asked him if he had a license. He said, "No, I'm from Ohio. I don't need a license." I was naive in that way, but I loaned him my car so he would take Pablo back over to Asbury Park. They came back 2 hours later, and both of them were very sad, and I said, "What's wrong? What happened?" And George Owens told me that he'd been driving, and he broke through a crossing barrier at a railroad track, and he had destroyed the car's windshield. I was really depressed. First, I asked him, "Did anybody get my tag number from my car?" And they said, "Oh, yes." And I said, well, I know if I stay in this state, that means I'm going to have to be fined $50 for letting a person use my car without a license. So I told the steward that I wanted to quit today. I had to go home. I had a bad situation at home, and I wanted my pay right now. He haggled with me and everything. "You have to stay until after Labor Day because we have so many people come here, you know. It'll be hard with only 2 people. With 3 people, it works out a lot better." I said, "No, I've got to leave now." And we haggled for about an hour. And then finally he decided to pay me off. I put it in my pocket, and I packed my stuff, and I was driving along. The wind was blowing in my face. I wasn't very comfortable because of the wind in my face. So I noticed a junkyard, and I pulled in, and I stopped. I went in, and I asked the guy, I said, "Do you have any cars like mine? I'd like to buy the window or the windshield. How much will it cost?" He said, $5. He told me to do it, so I went out there with a flashlight. I found it, and I took it off the old car and put it on my car. After that, I said goodbye, and I took off again, and I got to New York City. It was my first time visiting New York City. It was at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I saw a red light flash, and I was driving, and I got to that red light, and I stopped, and then again it changed green, and I saw another red light, and I went a couple of blocks, and I got to that red light, and I stopped, and then a policeman came up. He started talking to me, and I said I couldn't hear, and so he started writing out in a pad several lines, and he handed it to me and said, "Hey, you saw a red light 5 blocks. You should always stop at the next block too, and you have to do that every time you see a stop sign. You have to stop at the next block." And I said, "You gave me a bad scare. You went through an intersection and almost hit some cars. You could have had an accident on this street." I said, "Oh." And then the last line said, "Can you read English?" I said, yeah, I can." He didn't give me any ticket, and I said, "Thank you." I stuck the note in my pocket, and I got out of New York City. And I got behind a garbage truck. I was following it. Oh, it was real smelly. It smelled terrible. I guess they were taking food out to the pigs in Connecticut. And so I passed it, and it passed me up. And I got around it again, it passed me up again. So I slowed down to get way behind it, but it slowed down too, and it wouldn't let me pass all the way to Bridgehampton. When I got home in Massachusetts, it was all right. Went back to Gallaudet College, and I found a letter waiting for me from the New Jersey Central Railroad. I opened it up, and it says, "You broke a gate, and we're going to charge you $16. So I went to George Owens, and I said, "You were driving, and you weren't watching where you were going, so I want $5 from you." And then I went to my other friend and said, "You asked him to drive you to buy the shoes, so I want $5 to you." And since I was stupid enough to loan him my car, I charged myself $6.
I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. Growing up, I went to a school where the oral method was used. That didn't mean that all the teachers were hearing, but it did mean that all the teachers talked, and they did not use sign language. So, we would have to try to figure out what the teachers meant and tell each other. Then I went to Gallaudet College, and one of my first teachers, Judy Williams, was deaf. For the first day that I walked into her English class, I couldn't believe my eyes. Here she was, standing in front of the class, signing away. My friends told me that it was college policy for the teachers to sign, but it sure was new to me. Yeah, I signed with my friends, but with my teachers, I didn't like what was going on. The first thing that she wanted us to do was for each of us to write a short paragraph on the blackboards around the room. After we read each other's writings, the teacher went around and graded them. We all got D's and F's. What nerve! Here was this deaf teacher who thought she knew everything about English when I didn't think she knew anything about it, and she was tearing our work apart. That created a lot of commotion in the room. Finally she said, "Pay attention to me." I didn't like this situation. The teacher was signing, and this deaf person was teaching English to us. It didn't fit. She began pointing out our mistakes and explained why she had graded the way she did. That made me feel better and helped me understand what she was doing, but it still didn't feel right. After about a month or so, I decided that she did know what she was doing, and she was an honest-to-goodness teacher, and I was learning a lot. She helped boost my confidence in all kinds of writing. And after that, I never stopped. I fell in love with it. You know, maybe if I hadn't had that deaf teacher, my writing would have never improved. But it's obvious that she sparked my interest, and this just goes to prove that having a deaf teacher for any class, not only English class, is really important. The fact that she taught us through the use of American Sign Language allowed me to learn a lot. There's one sad thing, though. Judy Williams was killed in a freak car accident, and that hit me really hard. But I will always remember her as my first deaf role model. That's it.
I graduated from Gallaudet College 2 years ago, and ever since, I have been a student recruiter for Gallaudet College. My primary responsibilities were to visit different deaf schools in the United States and give talks about Gallaudet and to urge people to become students there. I traveled all over the U.S. visiting different states. During my visits, many funny things happened to me because of my deafness. For example, on the plane, often I would try to get a window seat so I could look out at the countryside, the rolling hills and the cities and so on. I would just stare. One time I felt a hand tapping me on my shoulder and saw this woman trying to talk to me. Of course, I couldn't understand her, so I wrote her a note, and it seems that she had been trying to talk to me and thought I was being snobby when I didn't answer her. When she realized I was deaf, she apologized. We started to have a conversation through notes. This made me wonder how many people might have been trying to converse with me all along. Of course, I wouldn't know. Many times in planes flying to and fro, I would try to order some orange juice, but would always get Coke. No matter how well or carefully I tried to say orange juice, I would always end up with Coke. Sadly, this happens because I can't talk. There was a girl with me at times who was also a student recruiter. One time we were at an airport waiting for a plane. This plane was very, very small, just a few seats. We agreed we would run into the plane and try to get 2 seats next to each other. We waited until it seemed they had announced our plane was ready to board, and we both ran in and got ahead of the line and found seats. Only then did we learn it was the wrong plane. By then, there was a long line of people filing in, and it was hard to get back out. We had to wheedle our way out through them. At least we learned that we had to make sure it was the right plane. This was an embarrassing experience for us. Another experience happened at a school as I was getting up one morning. I was visiting a school in California. As I awakened, I realized I was very late. I got dressed in a panic and threw things together in my briefcase and got in the car. I was driving along, and it was really dark, and there was nobody on the streets. They were all empty. I was speeding and still getting dressed at the same time and trying to comb my hair. When I got to the school, I found the gates were still closed. There were no cars in the parking lot. I thought about this for a while, and I looked at my watch, and sure enough, the time was right. I was sure I was late. All of a sudden, I realized that there was a 3-hour time difference between California and D.C. I was so exhausted that I had forgotten the 3-hour time difference. So I drove back to my hotel and slept for a few more minutes, and then I got up and bathed and dressed and arrived on time. If I were hearing, I could have asked the hotel to remember to call me in the morning, but I'm deaf, so what are you going to do? Something I observed while visiting mainstreaming schools, one thing happens in each of them all across the nation. When I go to the office and inquire where the deaf services are, they have to give these long, complicated explanations, which I could never figure out. Always it ends up that someone has to lead me there. Inevitably, a long journey begins through halls, around corners, and up and down stairs. The office I would be seeking would always be the last classroom in the entire building, never near the front. Why that is, I don't know. That's something I've noticed that all mainstream schools have in common. I've had many frustrating experiences in my work as a recruiter, but it's made it all that much more interesting. All put together, it's been a wonderful experience. When I was a sophomore at Gallaudet College, a bunch of us were preparing for a dance that was being given by the Kappa Gamma fraternity. We were working in the old gym, decorating the room, when we decided we needed some garlands to drape from the ceiling. We discussed the idea, and someone said we could go out to the woods back behind the farm a short distance away to get some. So all of us trooped on out there, and we got into the woods, and the first tree we saw was a big one with vines clinging to it. I noticed that the vines had 3 leaves each, which I thought meant poison ivy. I tried to tell my fraternity brothers, but one brother said, "That's not poison ivy, ignoramus. Those are Virginia creepers." "Virginia creepers?" I asked. "But my father told me that if it has 3 leaves like this, it's poison ivy." We started arguing among ourselves, but I decided to drop the argument and help them pull down all those vines. We put them over our shoulders and carried them back to the old gym. We had laid them on the floor and were wondering what to do next when Professor Drake showed up. He was curious to see what was going on in the old gym. He saw those vines on the floor and said, "I'm a farmer. I know that's poison ivy. I teach agriculture here at the college." We remained skeptical and decided to ask Professor Allison. He taught botany. "Maybe he knows more," we said. We called him in, and in a while, he showed up. Professor Allison said, "You are all so dumb. 3 leaves like that means it's always poison ivy. Virginia creeper has 5 leaves. Well, we were embarrassed. Shucks was all we could say. This meant we were going to have to bring back all that poison ivy to the woods. We hefted them back over our shoulders and carried them back out to the woods and left them there. The next night, I went to the Kappa Gamma party, and as I went in, I noticed that my friends were missing. I was wondering what had happened. Later, I found out that they were in the college hall dorm, all laid out with red welts and itching rashes. But it had had no effect on me because during my prep year, I had gotten a shot on my arm for my elbow, which was swollen due to an iodine allergy. That shot had made me immune to poison ivy.
I always tell people that Kendall Green is my second home, because it really is, since I've lived here almost all of my life. You know, I think that I'm probably the only person who has watched this place change over the years, since I never left this area. I can remember when Kendall Green was like a piece of the country, planted in the middle of the city, where everything was as green as could be. And on one side of the campus, there was a farm. As for my education, I attended Kendall School and then Gallaudet College, which I entered as a preparatory student. I had so many happy years at both of these schools. After graduating from Gallaudet College, I went on to teach. I taught preschool and at Kendall School, and I worked in the tutorial center. All of these jobs were before I went on to teach at Gallaudet College, where I have taught for the past 16 years. When I was a student at Kendall School, I lived in the dormitories on campus. My dorm was named House Number 4, which is now the Office of Demographic Studies. The house there used to have a front porch with a railing running across the front of it. And I remember one spring evening when we were allowed to go outside to play after dinner. And the Gallaudet students were outside also. I remember something that happened that night. They had something that was known as the college hour, which meant that the girls also could go out when they were done eating. So you would see boys and girls walking around in pairs all over campus. Well, some girls and myself were out playing on the side of the campus where we were allowed to be. We could only play on one side of the campus. Some of us were riding bikes, some of us were roller skating, and we would go back and forth between Old Gym and House Number 1. This is the house that Dr. Merrill lives in now. Well, going back to the topic of the college hour, when we would see a couple coming towards us, we would stop our playing and we would sit up on the railing on the porch, all in a line, and we would watch the couple walk past us. There was one particular couple who always stopped their talking until they passed us completely because they didn't want us to see what they were talking about. Well, our supervisor told us that we shouldn't sit like that because the college girls said that we looked like chickens, all sitting up on the rail, peering and gawking at those who walked by. My college years were really wonderful. I had good teachers generally, but there were two people who stick out in my mind because of the influence that they had on me. The first person I have in mind is Dr. Elizabeth Peete. She was the Dean of Women at the time. She was a very refined woman, very proper woman, who tried to make ladies out of all of us girls. The other person that I remember so vividly, and whom I and the other students loved, was Dr. Frederick Hughes. He taught drama classes, and he taught current events. During my senior year, I decided to participate in a Japanese musical that Dr. Hughes, or Mr. Hughes, was directing. His name sign is represented by the U-hand shape on the lips. I had the lead role, and that was called the Mikado. There was one scene in the play in which the man playing my lover and I were supposed to kiss. But Mr. Hughes didn't want us to do that in front of the audience because he was afraid of what the people might say, and also because Dr. Pete would be in the audience watching us. So he tried to figure out a way. He tried to figure out what to do, and finally he decided that I would use a fan, a Japanese fan. I was to be dressed in a kimono with a black wig and makeup on my face so that my eyes looked oriental. So, the two of us practiced and rehearsed this part by using the fan to hide our faces so that it looked like we were kissing behind the fan when we really weren't. We worked hard during rehearsals, and opening night, when it got to the kissing scene, I opened my fan, and we both put our heads behind it, and guess what happened? He kissed me for real. I was stunned for quite a while, but as I gained my composure, I did begin singing again, and the rest of the play went along all right. Well, I found out later that Mr. Hughes had seen him kiss me behind the fan, and Mr. Hughes couldn't believe it. He said, "Oh no, they weren't supposed to do that." Well, after that, the man playing my lover decided that he would cooperate with Mr. Hughes, and he wouldn't kiss me anymore. Now, there was another incident I'm trying to recall. It happened one afternoon when several of my classmates were hungry. We weren't allowed to leave the campus any earlier than 4 o'clock each afternoon, and at that time it was only about 2:30. So we decided that we would go to the drugstore, which was just across the street, and we would get a sandwich or an ice cream soda or something. Now, you must understand that when one of us girls wanted to leave campus, we had to sign out in a special book. But we didn't want to make Dr. Pete angry at us, so we decided we would just leave without signing out. We planned to go and get something to eat and come right back. So we started leaving Fowler Hall, which was the girls' dorm at the time. And once out on the sidewalk, guess who we saw? There was Dr. Pete, standing on the corner, waiting to cross the street. Well, that sent us all running back into the building, and we hid down in the basement. After a while, one of the girls told me that I should go back, and I should check and see if Dr. Pete had said anything to anyone. I left, and I took my time by going all the way up to the 3rd floor, pretending like I had been there all along. And I walked down the stairs and found Dr. Pete looking at the sign-out book. And she saw that none of the girls had signed out, and she said to one girl who was standing near her, "I just saw a group of girls come back into the building. Do you know who they were?" Well, Dr. Pete never did find out who we were. I forgot to tell you something about when I was living in house number 4. Often, we would see the college boys playing over near College Hall, which was their dormitory at the time. One winter evening, when there was a lot of snow on the ground, we could see a group of boys off in the distance playing around. They didn't have any clothes on, so you see that streaking was even around in the 40s. It's not something that came about just within the past 10 years. Now, back to Dr. Pete. As I said before, she tried to make ladies out of all of us girls. One afternoon, I was chewing some gum as I was walking down the hall. Well, Dr. Pete came walking up to me and said, "You know it's not very polite for a young girl to be chewing gum. You look like a cow. Please go to your room and sit there and chew it. Before you come back out of your room, spit out the gum." There were many other things that I could tell you about. I really feel as though Dr. Pete made my college life very exciting, as did Professor Hughes. They added a lot to it, and I have so much that I can look back on and remember.
I would like to tell you a story about Douglas Craig, comma, M period, M period. The MM meant Master of Mail. His duty for many years was to transport the Gallaudet College mail to the post office and bring back the mail. While I was in my preparatory class, the year of 1929, we call that the prep group. One evening, the upperclassmen put the prep group into one room, and they brought them out one at a time, blindfolded, and they took them into another hall, and they put their back up against the wall. They would pull the mask down, and we would see the black man, Mr. Craig, with a knife in his hand, threatening us and telling us, "Give me some money, give me some money." And we said, "What money? What money?" And the boy would say, "You owe him $3 for carrying your trunk up to the 4th floor where the preps live. You have to pay him now. We need the money now." And say, "Okay, okay." So we'd pull out the money and give it to him. And then they would bring in another boy, and they would do the same thing. Now, we felt sorry for him. You know, he was from the South, black man, and he had a knife in his hand. You know, he really frightened us. But later on, a few months later, the upperclassmen would call all the preps to the Lyceum, and they told us, "All of you must go to a camp at Great Falls with us." And many of us said, "Oh, well, we don't have any money. We've spent it all." But they laughed. "Oh, don't worry about it. You remember back in the fall, Douglas Craig came at you with a knife and had each of you give him $3? Well, we saved that $3, and we're now going to give it all back to you for your camp fees." Gallaudet College is really rich in tradition. Many traditions which were started back in the early years of Gallaudet College. Some became old and faded away, and some changed into new traditions. And some are still in use today. A few traditions that started years ago have continued throughout the years and are still in use today. for a sentimental reason, I have chosen one old tradition that's not in use today, and that is the Thanksgiving tug of war. Each year, new incoming students had to go through a period of time called hazing. In order to tell the difference between this group of new students from the older students, they were required to wear a buff and blue dink or beanie on their head and a red bandana in their coat pocket in front hanging out. And this was from the opening of school, the academic year, until Thanksgiving. Now, on this day, we used to challenge a tug of war from the freshman students. If they were successful in beating the freshmen 2 out of 3 times in this competition, then the preps were free to remove their beanie and the bandana. If they failed, they had to continue to wear the beanie and bandana until Christmas. Now, some upperclassmen ran the tug of war group, and their responsibility was to choose an equal number of participants from the 2 classes. Also, these 2 groups had to weigh about the same. Now, on the morning of Thanksgiving, it was usually cold with frost on the ground. Those 2 groups would meet over on Faculty Row. After they tied a red handkerchief to the middle of the rope, the upperclassmen would put the 2 groups on the opposite sides of the rope. To make the competition more exciting for the people who had gathered, the classmates would bring a water hose from a nearby fire hydrant, and they would use that to spray a stream of cold water on the red handkerchief. When the time to give the go signal was given from the upperclassmen, the 2 opposing groups worked, pulling back and forth, trying to pull the other group into the cold water area. Now, the water was really cold, and once a person got into that, they would lose their will and become useless to their group. Very seldom did we see 1 or 2 members of that group into the cold water recover and win it through the pool. And in the past, the policy of the upperclassmen was to make it more difficult for the new students. If the preps won on their first try, the upper class group would think of some excuse to say it was some type of mistrial. They would blame a foul on their part, and they would decide to cancel that loss or give it to the older group, the freshmen. And they would have another chance to win. And, it was just to save face. Well, it didn't matter if the preps still won 2 out of the next 3 competitions. The upper group would give the win to the prep group and excuse them from the requirement of wearing the beanie and the red bandana. So it was never a surprise. Over the years, the freshman group won the tug-of-war competition most of the time. Real jerky delivery. In the past, in the 1950s, Gerard Bernstein, a teacher here at Gallaudet College, one day he had his sister in the classroom visiting. It was really against the rules to have a girl in College Hall at that time, but both enjoyed talking until they heard a knock on the door. Gerard was real scared. Maybe it's a teacher who has come, so he asked his sister to hide in a closet. That closet didn't have any door. It was just a drapery on the front of it. And so he put his sister into the closet and closed the drapery, and then went to the door and opened it. And he saw an old man there. That man told him that, "Oh, I used to live in this room. I'd like the opportunity to come in and look at my old room again, and I need your permission." And so Gerard said, "Come on in." And so the old man came in, and he looked around slowly, and he said, "It's the same old room." Then he walked to the window, and he looked out the window. And he turned around, and he said to Gerard, "It's the same old view." And just before he started to walk, he noticed some shoes, a pair of shoes, and they were women's shoes. And he smiled, and he told Gerard, "It's the same old trick." Gerard was real embarrassed, and he says, "No, I didn't mean to do wrong. That's my sister. We thought that you were a member of the faculty, and I hid my sister in the closet." But the old man smiled again, and he said, "It's the same old alibi." When Dr. Edward Minor Gallaudet was president at Gallaudet College, it was traditional for the students to meet in the chapel hall every Sunday evening and listen to a speech. One Sunday night, Dr. Gallaudet introduced to the group a famous visitor, and he explained about the visitor's background. Finally, the visitor got up and looked out over the students, and on his face, he seemed to have a surprised look. The visitor turned around and to Dr. Gallaudet and asked, "Are these people deaf?" And Dr. Gallaudet responded, "Yes, all of them are deaf here in this college." And the visitor said, "But these people have ears."